Welcome to another episode of the Next Generation podcast. Today I have Sheri Glazier on with me, and I am so excited for this conversation, y'all. Sheri is an amazing dietitian in the agricultural space. So everything health, wellness, food, everything like that, but from a person who actually truly understands agriculture, both from a farming mindset and then also with their cattle operation. So Sheri, I'm not going to speak too much on your story. I would love it if you would just take it away, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It's always a unique opportunity to kind of share what I do because it is a little bit of a different space. But I am a registered dietitian, and I am very involved in agriculture. And I have been blessed to be able to bridge these two stories just throughout my career. It didn't always end up that way, though. I get asked a lot, how did you get to do what you do? Which I'll share that in a minute. But I would say it wasn't like I didn't sit down one day and search for a specific job, and then that's what I ended up doing. So, but like many of your listeners, I'm assuming also were involved in 4-H, FFA, all that good stuff. So I have a long history. It was like food and nutrition was my interest in 4-H. I showed cattle and pigs through FFA, did a few speeches, did a little bit of land judging, all those sorts of things through FFA. And like those two organizations are very near and dear to my heart. But also through that, I was also really enjoyed playing basketball throughout my high school career as well too. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to carry that into the collegiate space as well too. So I think my parents were pretty happy about that piece of the puzzle as far as getting some of that off their plate as far as getting that paid for. But kind of through all that, I was always interested in health and wellness. I didn't like the blood, didn't like the guts. Like nursing was just and a PA thing was just really, I don't know, didn't end up being my jam. And so ultimately, I landed finally at Oklahoma State University and was enrolled in their nutritional sciences program there. And so it's a dietetics major. So get my bachelor's through that and did my master's there as well. So I am a jack of a lot of trades, but I do have a master in one. And then through that, you also have to complete a 1,200-hour dietetic internship. And so unpaid, unlike the ag space, there's a lot of paid internships in ag space, side note, but dietitians do not get paid internships. And so through that, I was fortunate enough to land a job right out of that as well too. So I've been a dietitian for nearly 15 years now. But my first job through that actually was in large metropolitan hospital system, right? So kind of that dream job of that young, naive person very interested in healthcare. I love helping people, diabetes, all that good stuff. So I worked in a very large metropolitan hospital system for a number of years. A lot of education, a lot of ICU patients, tube feedings, wound care, new diabetes, like you name it, I've seen it. I've smelled some very nasty smelling wounds of those things, but they all require nutrition interventions, right? We don't really think about that. You think about the doctor, you think about medications, you think about nurses, but behind the scenes, dietitians are working through that too. So that was kind of my kickstart into that specifically. But the side note of that is I grew up on a wheat and stocker cattle farm, also Northwest Oklahoma. And so it's just always been a part of me and super proud of where I came from. I just wasn't ever really sure how I was ever going to be able to get back to that or how I was going to stay connected to that or what that really looked like. Because agriculture advocacy wasn't really a thing then. We didn't talk about it as much, right? And so that was always a core piece of my life. And then ultimately, little did I know I was going to marry into another multi-generational farming family as well too. So my husband Kyle and I, we now live north of a really small farming community of Loyal, Oklahoma. So I was commuting about 65 miles one way every day, back and forth to this large hospital job, right? And so it was great. I loved it. Anyway, then things change, right? Kids come, things change, and you're like, okay, now we really got to buckle down and decide what we're really going to do here. So anyway, just some things have happened. Went part-time, worked in an outpatient setting. It was my favorite thing I've ever done outside of what I'm doing now. Just sitting down with people and figuring out, digging deep into their nutrition story, and every time is a box of Kleenexes, right? So food is very emotional. It's not just carbs, protein, and fat, right? As like for us by the book, that's what it is. But we don't eat just by the numbers, right? We eat because we're happy, because we're sad, because we're celebrating, because we've had a funeral, because we've had a bad day, because we have a great day, right? So it's so emotional when you talk about food. So really digging deep into people's stories and making an impact through that and working through that has been a really great, was just a really, really great piece of time for my life. Um, so again, transitioned through that, worked in outpatient settings and rural hospitals as well too, through the same hospital system. So it's just kind of each of these moving pieces were contributing to my rural way of life, right? That I was able to contribute back to these smaller communities as well too. And then one day, there was actually a contract position that I stumbled across that was directly correlated to the beef industry with the Oklahoma Beef Council. They needed a contracting dietitian. And I remember texting my husband. I was like, was not planning anything additional to our life, but I need to apply, right? And he was like, what are you waiting for? So that was almost 9 years ago. And so that was kind of my jump into this agriculture industry with this nutrition lens. When I was at Oklahoma State University, I'll never forget this, but I combat a lot of misinformation these days. Agriculture misinformation, nutrition misinformation. And we were shown a documentary that was presented to us as factual while I was attending my undergrad at Oklahoma State. And I've never forgotten that. I wish I would have had the nerve to be like, hey, that is not how we treat cattle. That is not how things are normally done, right? There's a bad apple in every situation. But like, this is not the norm, right? Animal welfare, animal care are our top priority. This is not normal. And despite that, the way it was being portrayed to us, right? So anyway, that has always stuck with me, that I didn't have the nerve to speak up. And so I guess I'm making the mission of the rest of my life to be able to share accurate stories about agriculture and share the accurate nutrition information about animal proteins, about all foods realistically now. So anyway, I have kind of transitioned to, again, as you are very well aware too, that kind of the entrepreneur life, which is a little bit scary at times. But so I now operate under the Dirt Road Dietitian brand. So it was a very creative name, right? I lived on a dusty dirt road at the time, and that is what I operate under. And so, and then Kyle and I also operate our farm on our own as well too. And so we raise beef cattle, cows, calves, stockers that complement our wheat operation. It's very important to us that our cattle complement our crop growing because we are a dry land farming operation. So you never know when it's going to rain. We just came out of a very extreme drought situation. So that's always helpful. So we bridge that. And then through that, we've also expanded into the last 3 or 4 years in selling the beef that we raise direct from our operation as well too. And so, and our son, side note, is in 4-H and he's added chicken. So we're diversifying through that too. So glazierfarms.com is where that is kind of housed in that piece of our world, because people really want to know where their food comes from. And I totally respect that. But I also want them to be confident in the food that they purchase from us or the food that they purchase from Walmart. It likely came from a farming family, just like the person that you're talking to. So through that, and that's the work that I get to do with the Beef Council a lot, is sharing that positive story. So I work with a lot of different things, a lot of different pockets of things that I do. But I just came off of ranch tour season, what I call ranch tour season. It's basically, the mission is to connect those that aren't connected to agriculture, which is a lot of future dietitians. That's the main audience. And we just immerse them the full day in the full beef life cycle from beginning to end, cow calf operation, feed yard, all that. And to be able to see, right? Otherwise, I feel like we're hiding something. And then through that, bring in a ruminant nutritionist, veterinarian, meat scientists as well too, to be able to be part of that conversation has been really, it's proved to be extremely valuable. So something I pride myself in, that we get to do of the small work that we do here, right, for just one state, but to be able to network with those future dietitians and have that information at hand as well too. So through that, and then I have another thing on the side of a program that I'm getting ready to do this week. Actually, it's called Grown. That this is just the Dirt Road Dietitian side, but we're connecting any nutrition student, dietitian, nutrition professional that was curious about agriculture in Oklahoma, and so I tabbed it where Oklahoma's agriculture nutrition experts meet. And so this year we're going to go to Northeast Oklahoma and tour a mushroom farm, do some charcuterie building with some pork featured things, pairing with fiber rich foods, and end today with pecan orchard and the processing of that too. So I really want them to experience things from beginning to end, so that way they can see that. Because I will never forget, there was one tour that I did early on, very specifically. She's a master's student, had a master's degree in nutrition. And she's like, Sherry, I have to be honest, I never thought about food outside the grocery store until today. And so that statement right there has been kind of leading me in this mission of being able to connect others that don't have that opportunity to kind of what I do now. So kind of a lot of information, but a short bit of information of kind of where I'm at today.
Thank you, Sherry. Oh my gosh. Do you like not have your hand in any candy baskets? I feel like there's a lot of things that you involve yourself in, and just like your advocacy from like just like the dietitian side to your own family's operation to like connecting with college students and everything like that. And there's a lot that you do and give back to the community. So thank you from an agriculturalist myself. I would love, you said earlier in like your story and everything that a lot of what you do is battling that misinformation, or really just like from a dietitian standpoint, you are involved in all different facets of agriculture. So you see all of it, but then there's a lot of misinformation within agriculture that all roots back to food and where the food comes from and how it's raised and all of that stuff, whether it be antibiotics or the version of like the battle between grass fed and grain fed and like all of these different things that a lot of this stuff does come from nutrition, quote unquote, nutritionists or dietitians or quote unquote experts in the fields that are saying all of these things about agriculture. How, as a professional within that space, have you kind of, what's your advice for combating that misinformation, or just different views on that?
So that's what you said is just like all of it's wrapped in a big old package right there. Because I mean, ultimately, that's what it is. What we've noticed, specifically on the beef side, what we've noticed, there are consumers' confidence in knowing that beef is a nutritious product and knowing that it's, as far as the healthfulness, so they're very confident in that right now. So that's, I feel like that is, we have seen good movement in that. But then it comes to grass and grain finished beef, right? So, and there's always a level that people want to hang their hats on, right? So it used to be organic. It used to be, there's always something that people, it allows them some sort of, I don't want to say privilege, but they feel better about something internally if it has some sort of label on that. And right. And so marketers really tap into that. And so sometimes we have to really decide, is this really nutrition information, or is this really just a marketing tactic? And so I think ultimately that's what we try to help them sort through. My job is to present the information as factual as it can be, using the science, using the research available, and allowing the people that I come into contact with to make the decision of how they want to use that information, right? So if you really want me to know, I'll give you my opinion, but I'm also going to tell you that this is the research that's behind it. So that way it's not just, this is Sherry's opinion, right? So through that, what it kind of has stemmed from, and why I'm so passionate about making sure we understand the entire beef life cycle, is first of all, the disconnect from agriculture, right? So it's very unusual, right, to have someone that still is working on an operating farm, right? Most people in these days, it was either their grandparents or their aunt or their uncle that they would go visit the farm on a weekend or whatever. They have good, fond memories, but they don't have that day-to-day connection. They don't know the input costs. They don't know like all the struggles and things behind the scenes that it takes to put a product ultimately harvested versus, in the grain bin and then processed as well too. So that disconnect is there, and it's not their fault. So we have to create an environment that is welcoming for them to be able to ask questions in a safe environment, right? Not attacking, not anything like that. So anyway, so let me get to the grass and grain finish conversation. Like there's a very romanticized view about grass finished beef, right? So in their minds, I ask them, usually every group I ask them, like, what do you think of when you think about grass finished beef? And they're like, rolling hills, green grass growing all the time, birds are chirping, sun's out, all that good stuff, right? And so it's true, because that is what they want to feel. That's what they want to know, that this beef came from happy cows, well cared for cattle, all that good stuff. So we talk through that, and we talk about how long calves live with their moms. We talk about the weaning phase. We talk about backgrounding, and for me specifically, stocker cattle on wheat pasture, and how long, right, they're grazing on forages versus, the 4 to 6 months that they're in a feed yard setting in a very short amount of time, very efficient, and being able to see that and meet with those feed yard guys that are actually managing and doing and caring for them, right? I understand that everybody doesn't have this opportunity to share this, but it is still important to make sure that we understand the big picture to get to that. So, and we talk through that, because they're like, it's so expensive, because a lot of dietitians work with audiences that are food insecure, and they're like, we can't be recommending always something that's higher end product as far as dollar value to our clients. How can I be confident in this? And so this also gives them some confidence in recommending whichever way they want to go. We talk about the nutritional differences, that it's not significant between the two. We're still going to be recommending salmon if we need omega-3 fatty acids, right? We talk about budget. We talk about taste difference, right? So then it comes down to consumer preference. So it really helps them kind of pull down the veil on all those marketing claims on product items, so that we can see through that and have some real tangible examples. I talk to all these people on these tours, and I know I'm confident in guiding you whichever way that they feel that they need to guide their client or patient. So ultimately, that's what it is. I'll ask them how confident they are, and they're like, I don't know, Sherry. This is just what I hear and what I've read. Will you tell me, give me some context to this? And that's ultimately my job.
That's amazing. I absolutely love that. Just seeing the advocacy from a different lens within agriculture is so awesome to see, that not only are you really advocating for our food and where it comes from with clients, but also with other dietitians and professionals within the industry. And I feel like sometimes it does start at the top, that we need to be looking at how we're educating the people that are then educating our consumers. And that's just such an amazing viewpoint. You said earlier, and kind of talked about it within the advocacy, that food is emotional. It is extremely emotional, whether it's happy, sad, angry, all of the things, where food can have a lot of emotions associated with it. And then also just food can have a lot of socioeconomic emotions related to it. You said earlier that some people don't have the option to go with that higher class of beef in the marketing standpoint and spend that extra money. And so you're educating and doing all of that. Can you talk a little bit more about just emotion and food, and how you kind of combat that as a dietitian?
I would love to. So I get to speak a lot to ag audiences. It's kind of my favorite niche, because for some reason, sometimes we're kind of a bullheaded, I don't know, we're just a different breed of cat, right? And so they want to know that the dietitian's going to come in and say, hey, it's okay to eat animal protein, right? And so if you know anything about myself, it is that it's high quality, nutrient dense. Sherry is never going to take that away from you, right? And so that's why I enjoy working so much with those audiences, but also organizations that invite me in to be able to speak to their audiences as well too. So through that, though, again, I said it's not about the carbs, protein, and fat. It is about it, but at the end of the day, it's about your relationship with food. And so ultimately, really, that journey for me really started when I had kids, right? I was like, how do you teach a kid to honor their hunger, honor their fullness, when you have been told to clean your plate, when you have been told you can have one more bite, XYZ, right? So a lot of us have been through those phases, because we're raised by grandparents and our parents and people that we respect and influence us. And so that's where some of our food culture, our own thoughts about food come from, right? And so it's all done in well intent, right? But I don't think we realize how much about food is about, we were raised to be people pleasing, right? And so that's the biggest thing to overcome. Usually I always start off where we're talking about Clean Your Plate Club, and that club has been disbanded, and they're like, what do I do with this information, right? Because there are starving kids in other countries or whatever things. And a lot of that stems from the Great Depression, Dust Bowl type era for us too. I totally recognize that. But we also have to move forward in understanding, like, how do we help guide our kids to respect and honor their bodies and the food that's presented in front of them, and not cater to them, and allow them to say, hey, I'm good, I'm full. Like the first time I will serve dessert, if we have dessert, a sweet thing with the actual meal. Certain people freak out when I do that because they're like, you can't do that. They're not going to eat the rest of their food. And I just say, watch them. And it's really magical to say it's on an even playing field. It's not appropriate for everyone. But that to be said, a lot of times, there are so many diets, so many quick fix, desires, right? We live in a world that's like, we can chat GPT it, we can Google it, we can do whatever and get an answer right now. And when it comes to our health and our weight and whatever, like there's nothing that's just going to snap our fingers and it be fixed quickly, right? Even if you have gastric bypass or you're taking a GLP-1 or whatever that may be, like we still have to work on a relationship with food. If not, we're always going to want to be overeating or over consuming or whatever that may be. We got to get to a place where we're good with what we ate and can move on to the next thing, and it can't be consuming our minds. I always talk a lot about Oreos, right? You get Oreos, you don't have them for a while, you have them in your pantry, and they're just talking to you, right? They're talking to you and you're like, please eat me, please eat me. And by 6 o'clock, you're like, no, not doing it. 7 o'clock, no, not doing it. 8 o'clock, no, not doing it. The sun is now down, it's 9:30, and you give in to the Oreos now. And now you ate a whole sleeve of Oreos. When if you would have just honored that at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock and had 3 or 4 and moved on, enjoyed them and moved on, that's a wholly different situation. It takes a really long time. I have some clients, one specifically, she was about 2 years before it finally clicked for her and was like, I can finally just be fine with food. So it's a really hard conversation to have. It takes a long time to kind of work through all those emotional things. There's also an audience that's like, Sheri, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never thought twice about the food that I eat and move on. And I'm like, then you don't need me, right? That's amazing. You're not going to need me. But there's also a different pocket that has very complicated views about food, but it's just because of like external pressures, societal pressures, and things that have kind of guided towards that. So anyway, that's kind of a long thing. I will say, I will give a plug for pediatric dietitian Jill Castle. She's one that has really helped guide me as far as her books and resources and things as a parent, to help be able to set my kids and my clients' families up for success as well too. So that's been a really, really great resource for those of you that want to help for some guidance of feeding your kids.
That's amazing. I know I'm writing that resource down myself because I was a part of that family that was like, no, you're going to clean your plate. You're going to finish your food. You're going to be grateful for what you have and all of those things. And luckily as an adult, just like educating myself around what I'm eating, how I'm eating, all of those things. And then going to medical school for a little bit, it was really like, no, we're going to eat until we're satiated. I'm going to chew my food wholly, like all of these different like core concepts that, especially on a ranch, I feel like it was, no, we like got to eat really quick because we need to go feed. We need to go do this. We need to go like do all of these things. And so like I was that person that we'd go out to meals with family members and it'd be like, okay, Lauren's done eating in 5 minutes. What's next? Or type of thing like that. I would love to hear, like, as a dietitian, as someone who sees clients pretty regularly, what's some like kind of common things that you're battling right now with clients, or just like common things that you're seeing and how you're kind of overcoming those?
100% is breakfast, right? We live in a society that's just very, very busy. And I think there's just an element to this is figuring out how to become unbusy, right? Take back our lives, take back our food, take back our, because an element of that is also sitting around the table, right? So eating breakfast, getting your day started with something other than coffee, right? So straight coffee basically it's just not something that you want to do immediately. It's just not good on our gut. So you got to have that with something else. But also getting enough protein to start the day, right? So that's kind of to set yourself up for success, because what I see time and time again is if we skip breakfast or just have coffee, then we start getting hungry probably at 10 or 11 o'clock. And you're like, oh crap, I forgot to eat breakfast, right? And then what happens? Then you're like, oh, lunch is coming, or my lunch break, or whatever that may be for how your world is. And so then that timeline gets a little bit complicated. Then by 3 o'clock hits and you're just like freaking starving, right? And so basically, like, you kind of starve yourself all day, not intentionally, but you just set yourself up for like running on, I would say, maybe a quarter a tank of gas or less. We don't do that with tractors. We don't do that with farm pickups, right? You don't start your day on almost E. But so we got to think about fueling our bodies that way as well too. So fueling ourselves better in the morning can set yourself up for that not as hungry 3 to 4 p.m. situation where we end up consuming a lot more calories that are just usually not as high quality because we're just starving because we just have been busy until that time of day, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the big thing for sure is getting breakfast, making time for breakfast. And then the other piece of the puzzle for me really is intentional mealtime, turning off devices. And it's not always about the food. Okay. It's more about like, okay, now it's time to have conversation. We need to sit down. And my husband's not home a lot for mealtime because of the way of life that we have, but whoever is here still has to sit down. And that's when you kind of learn about what's happening in their day and their life. And my kids right now are 7 and 11. So there's a lot to be learned during that time.
You're a big proponent, obviously, for like that family meal time and like sitting down at the table. And I think you also have mentioned that you focus a lot of your recommendations around busy people in agriculture who have families. Like it has to be sustainable, not only for the individual, but for the family. Can you talk a little bit more about that approach? Why can't moms have their own diet and then kids have their own and like all
Yeah.
of that stuff and like it being sustainable for an entire family and not just like for a nitpicking individual within that family, and then the emphasis on just like that family time that's associated with it too.
Yeah. So I am a proponent of like one meal. That's what we're cooking. That's what we're doing. And then we're going to all try it or enjoy it. Um, because too, kids are watching you, right? Or the eyes are watching you. They're anything that you do, whether it's food, taking care of yourself, your driving habits, all the things, your kids are watching you, right? And so that's what we have to figure out. That's why I think this means so much more to me than just that, because I want my kids to be set up for the best success that they can have. And part of that has to be with getting them in the kitchen, right? I don't know. Right now, my son is very into wanting to make noodles, right? So is that the most convenient thing for me to do? Or is it more convenient for me to go to the freezer and pull out my Reams noodles and do it with that? Anyway, so our project coming up is to figuring out how to make egg noodles and things of that sort. So I say this is not all kids are going to be interested in those things, and I totally get that, but we have to create a space to allow those things to happen, right? You have to create a space to be able to say, hey, I want you to brown the hamburger tonight because we're having hamburger helper, right? I want you to do this or help me do this, right? It doesn't have to be significant. It can be little things, whether it's age appropriate. And then through that, through my social media over the years, I just started sharing simple suppers because people were like very curious of what a dietitian feeds their family, right? I'm like, I live 30 miles from a grocery store. Okay. So you're going to see fresh food certain times of the month. And then you're going to very much see when she's out. And now she's relying on her back stock of frozen and canned veggies and fruits, right? That's just how we operate. I know they're just as nutritious as fresh. I'm confident in feeding my kids that. But allowing people to be able to see that kind of behind the scenes through my social media has been very insightful for a lot of people. So through that, it's just like, hey, this is what we're having tonight. Some things are going to be put together. Some things are going to be more deconstructed. Honestly, for my kids, I didn't realize this until probably last year. They eat at school. They eat school lunch. Their school lunches are on segregated plates, right? So everything doesn't touch. Nothing touches. Well, I was like, why aren't you guys like, I was getting kind of frustrated because they were like, anyway, if it touched, they wouldn't do it. I was like, well, this is an easy fix. Target.com, we can get some segregated plates. So that's what we use now for them, and they can do their separate things. I like mixed dish things. I like flavors. I like flavor combinations and adventurous things. But for them is to be able to meet that need is to keep things separate, right? They don't want their rice with their bulgogi beef and broccoli all together. I do. They want it all separate. Cool. I'm not making separate meals. I'm just positioning it separately for them, or they're positioning it separately. I don't serve their plates all the time anymore. We've kind of overcome that. There was one other thing that I was going to mention, and I'll think of it in a bit.
All good, all good. When it comes up, we'll bring it back around. You mentioned right there that, like the fact that you are very rural, and that meal planning looks different for you guys because you're a rural family, and I'm sure a lot of people in agriculture can understand that. That we don't have super easy access to a grocery store at all times, or we do, and it's only 45 minutes away, but that's still an hour and a half, said and done just in driving to and from the grocery store. So we only go a few times a month. And so there are specific challenges with that sometimes metropolitan or like other dietitians or nutrition experts might not understand, that we can't have fresh all the time, especially if we're not a person that has a garden in summer and all of that. Can you talk a little bit about just how that has shaped your view on food and different ways that you kind of prep for your family with that?
So for me, if I can't get it here, it's not going to be something that I'm going to widely recommend for people. I do feel like I'm a little bit extreme. It's very interesting. Like, we don't live in the panhandle of Oklahoma, right? I literally live an hour and 15 minutes from Oklahoma City. But yet I still live 30 miles from a grocery store. It's just a really unique situation. Um, so kind of through that, I just have become way more empathetic, I would say, with everyone. But I'm also like, okay, I love to be creative with what I have. Like, I'll have a recipe, but I rarely follow a recipe because I don't always have all the ingredients. But over my years, right, you kind of figure out, like, you can pivot. I watch a lot of struggle meals. If you have Tastemade, the network Tastemade struggle meals is one that I enjoy a lot, because he just kind of takes some ingredients and makes something out of it. And I'm like, that's exactly what I do a lot, which I know is a skill that's learned. It's not something that is just like, oh, here's what I do, you know? So I think through that, and then empowering people, just recognizing I am fortunate enough to have a freezer of protein, and I fully recognize that too. So that's a privilege in and of myself. So I can kind of have that piece, and then we can kind of go from there. But empowering people that to have their confidence in canned goods, because there has been a stigma through that they're, what, not as helpful or whatever that may be. Same thing for can or for fruit as well too. The flip side of this is I have been on the recipient end. I love to be able to host tours, agriculture focused tours, but I was actually invited to a tour of Pacific Coast producers in California a couple of years ago to experience canned tomatoes and canned peaches, right? I'm not going to see that in Oklahoma. I wanted the knowledge to be able to see firsthand for the people that I get to talk to, including on podcasts, of like, okay, well, let's really see how this really goes down, right? Because otherwise, I don't know. We don't grow tomatoes widely here in Oklahoma, right? It's not happening. We're not in the Valley of California. I do not have that weather, amazingness here. And so ultimately, I got to see tomato harvest. They're basically really thick Roma tomatoes. They're made for canning, right? They're not made for the ones that you would do fresh. They're thicker skinned, more fleshy. And so experience that tomato harvest, go through that field, very similar to wheat harvest, right? Just a different type of mechanism. And then it goes into their, what I would call a grain cart, but they call them something different. I can't recall at the moment. And literally those tomatoes go from the field to a can within 4 hours. So we got to go to the cannery and experience that. Those tomatoes are washed out. They're basically floated out of those trailers. They're not dumped. There's not squished or anything like that. They're floated out and then washed and then on conveyor belts and all the things. And then from there you have, your whole tomatoes, your diced tomatoes, your fire roasted, all that good stuff. I got to see the fire roasted piece. It was really neat. And a lot of them, they're canned and then steamed after the fact, right? So it's just a can and there's no additives. It's just the tomatoes, right? So we have a lot of claims for additives and all those sorts of things. And the majority of what I was able to see that day is like, you just read the label and what's in there is what's in there. And that gives us fresh tomatoes year round, right? There's a Pioneer Woman salsa recipe that I love, her restaurant style salsa, and it's made from canned tomatoes and it tastes like fresh. I do it with my 4-H for my Cloverbud kids. We do taste testings to do a fresh tomato, canned tomato, and a salsa. And like, they're like, tastes like fresh. Well, it's canned tomatoes. Right. And so really to be able to connect those pieces back together to give people that fresh experience, and to ultimately to give them that confidence that you do not need to feel bad or feel guilty, because that's part of this food conversation is the guilt. You do not need to feel guilty at all about incorporating this into yours or your family's diet either. So same way with peaches, they're picked by hand, cling stone, right? So the flesh is clinging to that inner stone versus free stone, which we eat fresh. where it easily comes apart from that pit. Again, the flesh is more sturdy to be able to withstand the canning process, and that allows us to eat fresh peaches, fresh quote unquote, all year. And I don't know, they just taste good, right? Delicious, and they came from California. We can eat them year round here in Oklahoma or anywhere else that you are in the United States.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so stinking cool. Can you talk a little bit, just as an advocate for agriculture, speaking to other people that want to advocate for agriculture? You obviously were like, I had this opportunity and I took it, and I'm bettering my education and just like my overall knowledge so that I can then speak on it and things like that. Can you talk about the importance of that just as an advocate, that like that never ending learning cycle and different things like that, and different ways that maybe you've kind of approached it as well?
So I think it's reciprocal, right? So we only know what we know. And then I think it's sometimes really difficult to admit that, like, hey, I really don't know much about this, but if I have an opportunity arise, I need to go seek it out, right? And so I think there's some humility in that, of understanding that I don't know everything. And I want to make sure that anyone that knows me knows that I don't know everything. But if I don't know, I will go find the answer. Or I have a network of people, which is like what I think is very important about the agriculture industry, is to make sure that you tune into your network of people, because you probably know someone that can help you answer that question. And kind of through that, of something that's kind of out of my comfort zone. So the first Grown event, the event that we host in Oklahoma for dietitians, nutrition students, the first event we did last year was very much in my wheelhouse, right? So it was all wheat from beginning to end. We went to Enid, Oklahoma. There's a stone ground mill up there. All the things we saw from beginning to end. They have a restaurant too. Brady said, well, their whole crew is fantastic, but I was very familiar with that, right? That was a safe place for me. Versus this year, where we're going to a mushroom farm. I know nothing about mushrooms. I know nothing about growing them. However, I have contacts, and I've been able to partner a lot with Oklahoma Farm Bureau, and they have missions as well too, as connecting agriculture to consumers. And so this has been a great way to be able to do that. And so mushroom farming and charcuterie board building, and with support through our pork industry friends as well too, and to be able to see how you can pair animal proteins with our fiber rich foods and be able to carry those pieces together. And then eventually too, like pecans, right? We need to be eating more nuts and those health benefits from that. But that's not something I'm familiar with, of being able to see that harvesting process. So ultimately, it's trusting those that are experts in their field to be able to help bring this larger story together. And I'm just kind of the liaison to be able to get some of these things pulled together, right? Because it's really important for me to be able to showcase every aspect of agriculture. And I really feel like it's a story that has to be told, or else it's going to get told for us. And so we just got to do the best we can and seek out those opportunities to share what we can. It can be through social media, podcasts, but immersive learning and experiences are something that kind of people can take with them too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I just spent a week in Southwest Kansas learning about just different parts of Kansas agriculture. And as a Northeast Kansas girl, it's crazy how different it is down there, and how just like the struggles and the triumphs and everything that they experience that I never even could have fathomed as a like just I have a very diversified background in agriculture, but it's completely different going and stepping on these feedlots, these dairies, these everything, like going and doing an immigration panel, and why, like all of these different things that like we don't think about just because we don't know what we don't know. And it just was really eye-opening that I just a different part of Kansas. Like I just went to a different part of Kansas. I didn't go all the way to California and see tomatoes and peaches. I just went to a different part of Kansas. And so I think that is just a testament to anyone in agriculture. Just get out of your area. Like get out of your like area that has the same weather as you, same crops as you, same XYZ as you, and connect with those farm bureaus, connect with like your resources that you have, and be like, hey, so I want to learn more about this. What can I do to go and do this? And I guarantee you, your extension, your universities, your farm bureaus, like all of those places are like waiting for people to come knocking. asking them to utilize their resources that they've spent years building, and years building with partners like Sheri and everything like that, that they're just like, no, please, please come ask questions. We want to answer. We want to educate you, and just continue to grow your overall knowledge of the food system and just agriculture as a whole.
And that's what I hear time and time again with some of the experts that I get to bring in on tours. And they were just like, thank you for allowing us, because we talk within our own choirs a lot, right? And they're like, we don't necessarily always get that chance to really speak to the people that we really want to reach. And again, the populations that I work with probably is small to begin with, but their reach ultimately is further, right? So that's what you have to sometimes think about too. And the other piece to that puzzle too is even all the groups that I work with, I'm like, this is one tour that you've been on, right? This is just one occasion. These farmers that you're talking to, you're going to meet somebody down the road. And you're going to be like, well, that's not what I experienced on that day with Sheri. And you'll be like, that's exactly right, right? Our resources are different. Our climate is different. Our soil type is different, like all those things. And that's what we have to understand whenever we're talking too, that we're not the end all be all, right? When we're educating, this is just one piece of the puzzle. That farmer ranch is doing the best they can with the resources that they have where they're at, right? And I think that story is something that we can really champion within what we do too, because like everyone does things differently, and that's something that can be championed through that too, and making sure that people understand that there's no right and wrong way, because it's so diverse all across the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about like there's no right and wrong way within nutrition too? That like
Oh
everyone
yeah.
has access to different resources and like it looks different for everyone?
Yeah. So the thing about nutrition is science tells us that there's a lot of ways to eat a healthful diet, right? This is also why there are a lot of diets out there, short term things, flashy things that work for the short term, and the long term is like, okay, back to the hard knocks of life, right? If someone is not, they don't enjoy animal proteins, can we get the protein that we need? We can do that, right? Whether it's for religious reasons, or you have my friends that they raise wheat for a living and they have celiac disease, right? And so like that's complicated, right? So you have to meet people where they are, but also understanding that, hey, like there are always going to be gaps in accessibility. There's always going to be gaps in what they feel is right, wrong, or different. And we can still meet those needs in a lot of different ways, because as agriculture producers, we listen to consumer demand, right? And that's what guides a lot of what we're doing ultimately. And we can meet those needs. I think that's what's really insightful too. But again, if you're like, okay, I cannot tolerate fresh vegetables, which some people just their guts cannot, well, then that's where we have the great opportunity to highlight, canned veggies. Like, hey, we're going to start with canned green beans today. Instead of doing salad, like salad is not the miracle food, right? People have a lot of negative associations. Please don't tell me I have to eat a salad every day. And I'm like, you don't. There's a whole other wealth out there. However, it's just multifactorial, and there's just um, so many interesting things tied to food. And again, that goes back to that emotional situation. So, but I think at the end of the day, we just really I think part of it is just sitting down with our families, right? And really like hunger, fullness, really getting into that and making sure we have a decently balanced plate. And then knowing that we have another meal or snack time coming, right? And so that's sometimes what's complicated for a lot of people, is sometimes we have this end all be all of like, if I don't eat this now, I'm never going to get this again. When you're like, oh yeah, yes, you can. We can have it again. Same thing with holidays, right? So that'll be the next questions that will come. Holidays come, and like, oh my gosh, I got to eat all this because I'm never going to get this again, right? So if we have a healthy relationship with food, we can enjoy it and know that, oh, I really enjoyed that, and then we move on with our day, and we don't feel disgusting for 5 days to come. And so I think there's just a really balancing that emotional attachment to food as we navigate what is healthy, what maybe not as healthy, but at the end of the day, like what matters the most is that healthy relationship with food.
I think one of the biggest things that has completely like helped me and changed my mindset around food has been just like actually analyzing the way that my body feels after I eat it. Like, okay, so this is what I ate and this is how I feel. It made me feel energized. It made me feel tired. It made me feel like I needed to go to the bathroom. It made me feel like I was sick for 4 days. Like all of these things, and just like using that self-analyzation of like, okay, so these are the foods that right now with my current gut microbiome and everything like that is really really working for me. And these are the foods that my body is like, oh, hell no, keep that away from us. And I think that that is just something that is like the self-awareness of like how your own body reacts, because all of our bodies react differently to different
Yep.
foods and different things like that. So I think that's just been the thing that's been most instrumental for me of like, okay, I know that XYZ foods just don't sit well with me right now, and I'm just going to stay away from them, and that's okay.
And that's the thing. Everyone's gut microbiome it's a very interesting thing. It's much more, we know much more about cattle gut microbiomes than we do about humans. And I think that's really interesting to know. It's very popular right now, but also to think about that too. Like if you've had some sort of, I want to say gut disease or gut bacteria, like it may have altered you. And so sometimes you got to figure some stuff out. Some people can tolerate sourdough bread, absolutely 100% fine. Commercially produced bread can't do it, right? So then we got to identify,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, obviously it's not the gluten. We have some other things to work through that too. So like, again, it's not black and white as we kind of navigate through any of this either. And I think through that, the fermented food space is very, very interesting. Just knowing like, hey, again, if we're thinking about nourishing ourselves versus just, healthy or unhealthy or whatever that looks like, there's just a lot to be learned there. But again, being in tune with your body is a lot better than the opposite. And a lot of it has to do with also what we're drinking, right? So I have frustrations that like, a pop, Coke, whatever, used to be like a really fun thing to get for kids, whatever. It used to be a nickel, it used to be a dime or quarter, whatever. But like you can't go anywhere without it being an option for us to actually consume. And ultimately what we're doing is just consuming sugar, right? And it's fine, but in the amounts that we can get in 32, 44 ounces, does anybody need a liquid? I like liquid IV in the packet, right? But this is just a liquid IV of sugar. That's complicating, right? But it's become kind of our societal norm. So really, how do we combat that? How do we navigate that? And that's something that we really, I think, is an area for opportunity for us to really kind of take control of.
Yeah, I seriously couldn't agree more. I would like to shift lenses a little bit away from just like the whole foods area and into just like vitamins and minerals, and how as a society we are extremely malnourished sometimes, and just like truly the things that our body needs to function and run, whether that be from diet, whether that be from water, whether that be from whatever your area and like things look like for you. As a society, it is a real problem, and I would love to hear just kind of like your insight on that and how you kind of encourage your clients to not only make sure they're getting the right foods in, but like, hey, like from a like building block standpoint, this is also why we need to be focusing on these things.
Right. So the multivitamin situation is a lot more kind of behind the scenes, right? So I talk about beef nutrition a lot, right? So we think about protein, but we don't, the iron, the zinc, right? The choline, some of these things that it's not going to be like flashy on the label, but those things really matter. The B12, right? So people are like taking B12 supplements. And I'm like, well, if you eat 3 ounces of beef, a lean cut, like you're getting 101% of your daily value, right? So
Yeah.
like, and again, if we have a healthy relationship with that, not eating 16 ounces at a time and pairing that with, some roasted veggies, and canned peaches, right? Or something, like we can make all those things work. But at the end of the day though, like multivitamins are still a good insurance policy, in my opinion, right? If we're not getting fatty fish twice a week, should we be taking a fish oil supplement? Probably so. Like as I'm getting older or more wise in my life, these things are becoming a little bit more, I would say they just kind of rise in a little bit more importance, from my lens of the people that I help, and do. But really, and vitamin D is another one of them, right? Like a lot of us work outside a lot in the summertime in ag space, but in not ag space, or we inside a lot, we're not getting vitamin D from the sunshine. So like, and that stuff, there's a lot of impact on our headspace, on our mental health of those things that we really like sometimes underappreciate. And it's not something that always a lab work is going to tell you what you really need either, because it'll look just okay, just fine enough. The other thing too that I have seen a trend in people in agriculture, uh, because we work longer laboring hours, specifically in the summertime and into the fall, right? So if we have fall harvesting families, but they were like, man, I'm drinking plenty of water, and maybe their diets are cleaned up. They're not eating much fast food. And I'm like, are you, are you eating enough salt? And they're like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm like, well, check your skin. Is your skin, they're like, my skin feels scaly. I just, I feel under, not, I just don't feel right. And so we kind of navigate through that. But then I think during certain times of the year, right, based on sweat and hours worked and all the things, we're dehydrated population. And so, but then it gets into drink packets. Like, well, what do I even need to be doing? And you've got to understand what are your differences between them all, right? So you have Element that's like 1,500 milligrams of sodium, and you have Propel that's 200, and you have Prime that's 20. Okay, so you might be popping a drink packet thinking you're doing good, and then I'm like, okay, well, how much sodium was actually in there to replace what you lost it in? They're like, I have no idea. I'm like, well, let's look at that, because it's a give and take situation. Do you need that in January and February? Probably not. But when we're looking at May to August and you're working your rear off and you're sweating, then we probably are behind the eight ball in hydration status. So I say that, and we be mindful of those packets that you use and the purpose of them. If it's a flavoring agent, we don't need much. If you're using it as a hydrator stick, then yes, we need a little bit more sodium, but it depends. If you need 200 milligrams, if you need 500, which is liquid IV, I believe, and then the 1,500 to Element. So it's a really big wide range there that you could be harming your heart health when you thought you were helping it too. So we got to be very mindful of those things. And that's where my expertise as a dietitian is helpful, because those products are confusing.
Yeah, they are. They can be really confusing, and a lot of it can just be like the marketing and social aspect of them and everything like that, that like we're not even fully aware of how we should be using these products, what
Yeah.
vitamins should we be taking, and like different things like that, that is just super important to our overall health and nutrition and just well-being and mental clarity and everything else that comes and roots from our food and what we're putting into our bodies. You talked a little bit about it, but I'd love to dive into it more. What we're drinking, just the focus on what we're drinking, how we're drinking it, things like that. In a society that you can go into a gas station and there's more options for sugared IVs than there are for waters. And just
That's
different
what I'm
things
calling
like
it,
that.
sugar IVs.
Sugar IVs. That's what I'm calling it from now on. We're walking in and we're seeing all the sugar IVs. Just like the thought process of like, I'm not like, for me, I'm a proponent of like, I'm not going to drink my calories. I'm not going to like, I would rather have a brownie at the end of dinner for me personally than a Diet Coke 3 times a day or something like that. Can you just talk a little bit more about like what we're drinking, what we're choosing to drink, and like the impacts of that?
It's kind of a lot to unpack, right? So, and why we drink it too. I might even start there because I ask the question why a lot, which is why I'm like, maybe I'm a like lifelong learner and have my hands in too many things. But for some people, why they drink it was because of their upbringing, right? They weren't able to purchase
Mm-hmm.
Pepsi as a child. It was not on their in their budget for their family, and they're like, "Gosh darn it, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to buy Pepsi, and this is what I'm going to do." Right? So that's one element of that. The other is just I would say the other piece of this also becomes energy, right? So the energy drink sector is another thing that is a very common topic that I get to talk about a lot. And my question always is, why do we need an energy drink, right? Like, well, I'm tired. Well, I'm like, okay, why are we tired, right? And so as you kind of dig back through that, and a lot of times it just goes back to sleep, right? So 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Some people are like, that's laughable. It's not for me. I prioritize my sleep. But as they navigate through that, the more tired we are, the poorer our food choices, right? And so, which means the higher calorie, which means we're probably not as healthful, right? Which means our sleep is probably poorer, which means our mentation is probably not as good, which leads us to all these quick fixes, right? So it's just very cyclical, but you have to remove one piece of that cycle and really change something before you can really see change in the rest of it. So it may not be just stopping energy drinks. It might be prioritizing our screen time before bed and then start changing there, right? Or it may be start eating breakfast. Like there's just a lot to kind of work through and unpack in that cycle, which I think is what leads us to the gas station sometimes, right? That 3 p.m. or the 8 a.m. start, got to have my Dr. Pepper or Mountain Dew, or got to have whatever at 3 o'clock, happy hour, right? Because of that slump. Well, is it because that I really didn't feel well to start the day and I started on that quarter of a tank? right? So as you can kind of see, we kind of go full circle in this conversation piece. But yeah, the energy drink piece, the thing that scares me the most is our kids, right? They're influenced. They're easily influenced because marketing is just all over. They have YouTube stars that are, whatever it is that they are advocating for. Prime, like they just want to carry around that Prime bottle, right? When I was a kid, we wanted to carry around our Sonic cup here in Oklahoma, right? That was the cool thing. And so that's what's scary the most. And then seeing people that they idolize or that they look up to, drinking energy drinks, right? And do we need that much caffeine in a small person's body? No. It's the same way with workout supplements too, right? So they're pre-workout. They're like, oh, I get too jittery. And I'm like, well, do we even eat a banana before we worked out? Because that's what you need. You need the carbs instead of, a higher priced item. But again, it comes with that bougie marketing can. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to unpack there. At the end of the day, I'm a big fan of buying a fancy cup. I keep it full. And if it's iced and I have a straw, I'm going to be successful, right? What I also know is some people with these cups have a tendency potentially to be overhydrated because we're just drinking all the time, right? And so that's what we have to now really navigate. You can identify that. You can examine the color of your urine. If it's looking more apple juicy and not as far as clear, then we have a hydration problem. If you're way too clear all the time, then you still may have an overhydration problem. So you kind of got to meet in the middle. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned earlier, consistent consumption of sugar could be potentially dangerous. It's dangerous for sending us our heart health, for diabetes, even liver as well too. So liver failure or fatty liver can be directly correlated to excess sugar consumption. A lot of that, I feel like from my work, a lot of it comes from our beverages.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. I have loved every single thing that we have talked about today. It has been amazing. This has been just like the best conversation ever. Sheri, if people are listening to this and they're like, I need more of Sheri, I want to get in on like her offering, all of these things. Can you chat a little bit about, as a dietitian, what you offer? Just like from that standpoint of your Dirt Road Dietitian business.
Yeah, so kind of three pieces, right? So I talked about my 2 ag tours before. So I love to work with ag organizations, whether it's tours or speaking within to your organizations as well too. So bringing that healthy relationship with food piece or the touring piece, I love that side of it as well. And then the other piece is just the one-on-one client coaching. Do it from the comfort of your own home and really kind of dig deep into your story, because everyone's story is different. And I believe in that. And it's all at dirtroaddietitian.com. And dietitian is DIETITIAN.com. And that's kind of all housed within there. So kind of those two pockets. And then, of course, as I talked about earlier, connecting our consumers to our farm as well, too, at glazierfarms.com as well, too. So those are kind of the 3 buckets of life that I get to live in.
Absolutely. And I will have all of that linked down below for everyone. So if you guys are like, I can't get enough of Sheri, I want more of her, head down to the links down below and you can get a ton of that. Sheri, as we start to round out our podcast and finish up our conversation today, I would love to end on the one piece of advice that you have for the next generation of agriculture.
My next piece of advice for the next generation of agriculture is I want you to never stop learning. That is just it. I want you to be a lifelong learner. Be involved in those organizations that allows you to be a lifelong learner.
That is amazing. I could not agree more. It has been the biggest thing that has been the most like beneficial catalyst for my life, and just that continued drive and motivation. So thank you, Sheri. I greatly appreciate your time today. That was an amazing piece of advice and just such a fun conversation. I will have all of Sheri's links linked down below. Go hit her up, follow her Instagram, get in on her nutrition programs, anything like that. And as always, thank you for listening to another episode of the Next Generation Podcast. We'll see y'all next week.